Hey guys, tonight we dive into the mud-caked boots and blood-soaked gloves of a job so grim, so weirdly bureaucratic, you might not make it through awake. This is the strangely exhausting, socially disastrous, and frankly uncomfortable reality of being a medieval executioner. There's no glamour, no dramatic slow-motion axe swings, just a lot of sweat, judgmental neighbors, and the creeping smell of iron in the air. Picture it now. You're standing in a muddy square, the crowd buzzing like flies around old meat. Your boots are squishing through layers of straw, sludge, and, well, let's just say medieval sanitation wasn't up to modern code. You're holding a very sharp axe, or maybe a rope looped just so. And somewhere behind you, a guy is whispering a prayer while his knees shake. Oh yeah, he's your client. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Midnight in Manchester? 3 a.m. in Minnesota? I want to know. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You drag yourself through the early morning fog, your tools wrapped in an old cloth slung over your back. The crowd doesn't cheer for you. They don't even like looking at you. You're not a hero or a soldier or even a real civil servant. You're just the guy who does the job no one else wants, who must be there, yet who no one really wants around. That's already your first big problem. One mainstream historical fact is that executioners in medieval Europe weren't universally reviled by the law. They were paid and often required by local governments. But the public? Whole different story. Even if your job was officially sanctioned, your existence carried a stink, literal and metaphorical. Most townspeople wanted you out of sight when you weren't actively working. Which, for you, means long days holed up on the edge of town. Sometimes literally. Many executioners were forced to live outside city walls, banned from entering churches or even public bathhouses. Imagine clocking out and not even being allowed to soak your feet next to the same sweaty villagers who just watched you work. And yet, here you are again, trudging back from a job no one will thank you for. In fact, you might get spat at. You can't eat in half the taverns because your presence might make someone lose their appetite. Even the local dog avoids your shadow. Probably smart. Still, you're not entirely useless in their eyes. Some people, especially merchants and city officials, understand that you're a necessary cog in the wheel. You're the deterrent, the final warning, the guy who turns "don't steal bread" into a real consequence. But they'll only admit that behind closed doors. In public, you're just a walking, breathing reminder of what happens when things go wrong. And, fun side note, you're not rich. Despite what you might expect from such a high-stakes gig, pay was inconsistent, often negotiable, and in many towns, you were expected to fund your own tools. Some executioners got paid per head. Others received a flat yearly wage. But it was rarely enough to live comfortably, especially if your face meant no one wanted to trade with you at the market. The fringe tidbit here, some executioners resorted to robbing corpses they executed. If the body wore shoes, you took them. Rings? Off the fingers. It was unofficial hazard pay. Morbid? Yes. But when the townsfolk refused to pay up, you made ends meet however you could. Historians still argue whether this corpse looting was officially tolerated or just conveniently ignored. Some records show authorities cracking down on the practice. Others seem to hint that everyone sort of shrugged and let it happen. After all, who was going to argue with the guy holding the axe? So, you finish your job, maybe collect your payment from a man who refuses to make eye contact, and you shuffle home again. Maybe you try to wash your hands in the river before returning to your sad little shack. And as you sit down, sore and alone, you realize no one thanks the person who cleans up society's mess. You're part butcher, part priest, part janitor of human consequence. You wield the authority of kings and courts, but without any of the prestige. You exist in a social no man's land, necessary but never embraced. Your boots dry by the fire, crusted in dirt and something else you'd rather not identify. And tomorrow, there might be another name called, another set of eyes staring wide at the chopping block, another crowd craving the drama of justice, never thinking twice about the one who swings the blade. You wake up to the familiar thud of someone throwing a turnip at your door. Again. It's not even a good one, soft in the middle, probably the last in the basket. But that's life when you're the local executioner. Not feared, not admired, just sort of avoided, like a splinter or a bad omen that's decided to rent a room in the village. And here's the twist most people don't know. You didn't exactly apply for this job. See, unlike blacksmiths or bakers, you didn't wake up at age 10 with a dream of one day swinging an axe professionally. This career often chose you, and not in a poetic, destiny-fulfilling way. More like a, congrats, your uncle messed up and now this cursed profession runs in the family kind of way. In many parts of medieval Europe, the job of executioner was hereditary. If your dad chopped heads, chances were you'd inherit the chopping block too. That's one family heirloom you'd probably try to sell on medieval Craigslist. Now, there were exceptions. Some poor souls were appointed executioner as a form of punishment. That's right, commit a crime, survive your sentence, and boom, you're offered the job. You're not quite welcome in society, but also too useful to just discard. So you're rehabilitated through a job that no one else wants. Thanks? And yes, sometimes the role came with perks like legal immunity, housing on the outskirts of town, or your very own apron, stylish and blood-resistant. But at what cost? One historical record shows a thief in Bavaria who, instead of execution, was offered the job of executioner. He accepted, likely because become the hangman beat become the hanged. A no-brainer, really. But imagine explaining that at a party. Oh, I used to steal goats. Now I cut people's heads off. Funny how things work out. This awkward career ladder wasn't exactly built with rungs, more like splinters and trapdoors. And if you didn't want the job, tough. In many towns, refusal meant exile, or worse, execution anyway. So congratulations, you've gone from convicted criminal to city employee, all in one humiliating pivot. Here's the quirky tidbit of the night. Some towns literally dragged unwilling executioners to the site of their first job. Local laws sometimes required that the new candidate perform the act in front of a crowd, just to seal their fate. If they did it right, boom, career secured. If they didn't, well, it was a short-lived gig. Historians still argue whether this forced appointment was a widespread practice or more of a regional desperation move. Either way, records of first-timers botching their debut are common and rarely ended in applause. Nothing like starting a career with a very public failure and a bunch of very judgmental peasants. And you think your onboarding process was rough. Now, once the job was yours, you couldn't just walk away. Executioners weren't free to change careers. Most towns treated the role as a lifetime appointment, until retirement or death, often the same thing. Leaving the post could mean legal consequences, especially if there was no one lined up to take over. Imagine quitting your job only to be arrested for quitting your job. Medieval HR, ladies and gentlemen. That's why so many executioner families trained their children young. It wasn't just a trade, it was survival. Better to have a kid with a steady hand than to let them grow up and get kicked out of town for being unemployable. Talk about awkward career counseling. You think about your own entry into this world. Maybe your father taught you the ropes with a quiet grimace and heavy hands. Or maybe he never talked about it at all, just handed you the tools one morning and walked out, leaving behind only a note and the faint metallic smell of regret. Even training was weird. There were no guilds, no apprenticeships, no curriculum. You learned by doing. Maybe you practiced on animals, maybe you watched a few veterans' jobs, Or maybe you just got thrown in with a nod and a don't miss. Let's be real, this wasn't a dream gig. It was more like a curse passed down through generations, one that followed your family name through every tavern, every market, every whispered conversation. Even your kids weren't safe. The blood on your hands bled into theirs. So you sit at your table, sharpening your blade, wondering how many generations back this started. Wondering if there was ever a time when your family did something different, made shoes, wove baskets, cured meat even, something that didn't involve this endless dance with death and public disgust. And you think, maybe your son will have a choice. Maybe he'll run. Or maybe he'll sharpen the same blade tomorrow and wonder if you ever dreamed of leaving it all behind. But then the bell rings again. Another name.
You toss on your cloak and head into the morning drizzle, the kind that makes everything feel soggy but never quite commits to being real rain. The bell that summoned you still echoes faintly in the cold air, like a headache you can't quite shake. Another job. Another face, another crowd with the popcorn already metaphorically popped. The condemned is already waiting in the town square, guarded, shivering, muttering prayers, or curses, depending on the mood. You nod at the magistrate without a word. He nods back, looking everywhere but at you. You're like that cupboard in the kitchen labeled cleaning supplies. No one wants to open it unless absolutely necessary. Today, it's a hanging. Straightforward as far as these things go. No horses involved, no elaborate wheels, no fiery pyrotechnics. Just a rope and some precision. You'd almost call it routine if it weren't for the constant danger of everything going terribly publicly wrong. Here's a mainstream historical fact that might surprise you. Executioners weren't just expected to perform the sentence. They were supposed to make it look good. A clean swing, a quick drop, a death that reassured the public that justice was not only done, but done with confidence. Because a botched execution, that wasn't just embarrassing, it was a spiritual and political mess. There were crowds to impress, priests to please, and a sense of divine order to uphold. If someone twitched for too long on the rope or screamed during a botched beheading, it could call the whole affair into question. Was it divine punishment or human incompetence? Either way, guess who got the blame? So no pressure or anything. Just make sure the death is tidy, theatrical, and morally digestible. Maybe throw in a dramatic pause or a solemn nod. You're basically a one-man stage crew for state-sponsored doom. The condemned looks at you like maybe you're the last person on earth who could grant mercy. You're not, but you nod anyway. It's the closest thing to kindness you can offer before the lever gets pulled. And here comes the fringe detail. Some executioners developed little flourishes, personalized styles. It wasn't about ego, it was about rhythm. Familiar gestures helped settle their nerves, like a baseball player's pre-bat routine. One guy always cleared his throat 3 times before swinging. Another adjusted his gloves obsessively, like it was a dinner party instead of a public death. Some, oddly enough, gave nicknames to their tools. Your own rope has a slight fray near the base you've refused to cut, claiming it's lucky. You don't believe in luck exactly, but you also haven't missed a drop since that fray showed up. So it stays. Historians still argue whether this element of performance was personal habit, public expectation, or a subconscious survival mechanism, something to shield the brain from the reality of the act. All 3 sound right, depending on the weather. Because here's what they don't tell you about executions. They're noisy, messy, and rarely go exactly as planned. The rope stretches, the body twitches, the crowd gasps, then hushes, then forgets you even exist. And yet, there's a strange ritual to it all. Not sacred, but predictable. You place the knot just right. You check the height of the drop, calculating in your head with the accuracy of a bored engineer. Too low, and you risk a long, agonizing swing. Too high, and you might separate more than intended. Physics was never your favorite subject, but here you are, doing math with a human life as the variable. A job well done means silence. No screams, no second attempts, no messy cleanup. Just that one moment of stillness after the fall, when even the crows seem to pause mid-caw. Afterward, you don't linger. You collect your tools, wipe your hands on your apron, and disappear before the taverns open. You don't want to see anyone's eyes when they order breakfast. You don't want to hear your name whispered over tankards of ale, or speculated on by people who still believe death is a kind of magic. But you do stop by the magistrate's window. Payment today, hopefully. Sometimes it's coins, sometimes bread. Once, just once, a bag of onions. You didn't complain. Soup's soup. Your cloak soaks heavier in the rain as you walk back to your edge-of-town shack. It's small, but you've made it yours. A cot, a fire, a shelf with a few tools you don't need but can't throw away.
You wake with a jolt in the middle of the night, heart pounding, unsure whether it was a dream or just that old beam above your head settling again. Either way, you're up now. And in the quiet hum of darkness, you're reminded of something far worse than your job, the way your town remembers you. Or doesn't. That might be worse. Being an executioner means walking around with an invisible bell tied to your neck. You step into a market and conversations trail off. Eyes dart, hands grip baskets tighter. People shuffle their children away like you're contagious. And yet, they need you. At least, the law does. The paradox is exhausting. You're both part of the community and never really in it. A figure of authority and dread, but also sort of embarrassing. The civic equivalent of an uncle who yells during weddings and brings pickled eels to picnics. There's a long-standing medieval tradition of excluding executioners from certain public events. Want to join the town feast? Sorry, your presence is unsettling. Want to marry someone not already an outcast? Good luck with that. And heaven forbid you try to take communion at church. Some priests refuse to offer the sacrament to anyone who regularly touched the damned, which, yes, includes you. Like your fingertips were dipped in sin, and everything you touched after carried a faint echo of death. Even your tools weren't allowed to mix with other trades. If your blade was sharpened by the local blacksmith, he might then lose customers who worried about spiritual contamination. Fun. You once tried to buy a loaf of bread from a woman at the market, only for her to hold it out to you with tongs. Not even fancy tongs, just regular fireplace ones. You took the bread anyway, pretended not to notice. She still sprinkled salt where you'd stepped, muttering prayers under her breath. And here's the quirky bit. In some towns, executioners had to wear special clothes in public. Bright yellow or red tunics, like walking caution signs. Some even had their professions sewn into the fabric. Can you imagine? Hi, I'm Jeff. I kill people for a living. Please don't invite me to your cousin's wedding. Historians still argue whether this branding was required by law or just a strong social custom reinforced over time. Either way, the result was the same. You could be recognized from a mile away, long before anyone remembered your name. And then there's the matter of where you live. Your house isn't just on the edge of town, it's practically falling off it. Built right up against the forest or the river, always one wrong step from isolation. It's not because you like the solitude, it's because that's where the town puts you. Somewhere out of sight. Somewhere where no one has to accidentally make eye contact with you while buying plums. You might get visits from the desperate, the sort of people with nowhere else to go. Widows begging for mercy. Drunks looking to swap gossip for booze. But mostly, you get solitude. The kind that soaks into your bones. The kind you stop noticing after a while, like a dull ache in your shoulder that just becomes part of the background noise. Some executioners dealt with this by creating little worlds of their own, private gardens, rituals, pet dogs that didn't mind the silence. You've got a few chickens. They don't care about your reputation. They just want feed. Once, years ago, a boy snuck out to talk to you, said he wanted to see your tools, said he thought they were cool. You showed him your sharpening stone and the balance weight you use for calculating drop lengths. He was fascinated, said he wanted to learn. You sent him away, not because you didn't like him, but because you did. And maybe the loneliest part of all is how little anyone knows you. Your favorite food, your real laugh, the dumb way your left knee pops when you crouch too fast. All that gets buried under the job. You become a title, not a person. You're the last stop on a journey no one wants to take. Even at taverns, when you dare to show up, hood pulled low, coins ready, they serve you in silence. Ale at the far end of the table, a bowl of stew that no one dares refill once emptied. If you speak, voices hush. If you cough, people stare like it's a curse about to leap from your throat. And yet, you're still expected to show up, perform, maintain decorum, be a model of moral fortitude, whatever that means when your entire profession involves legally sanctioned killing. Sometimes, after a particularly quiet evening, you light a candle and try to write. Not letters, no one writes you back, but little observations, notes, bits of memory. It helps you feel like someone's listening, even if no one ever reads it. In one, you wrote about the way the sky turns honey-colored just before a storm. In another, you described the weight of a freshly twisted rope.
You're halfway to the gallows before you realize you've forgotten your gloves. Again. And of course, now that it's harvest season, the square will be full. Every merchant, baker, and overly curious child pretending not to watch you from behind a sack of potatoes. No chance of slipping through unnoticed. The thing about your gloves isn't vanity, it's about grip. The last thing you want during an axe job is to fumble the handle like it's a greased-up eel. That, and they're the one item that makes you feel vaguely human while performing the most unhuman act imaginable. Today's case involves something people are already whispering about, a nobleman. Not too high up the chain, mind you, just enough to warrant a cleaner swing, a better coffin, and a priest with both hands on the book. You can almost smell the anxiety floating through town like someone's been burning sage made of pure scandal. This is when the rules change. When it's a peasant, things are a bit looser. The wood's cheaper, the crowd rowdier, and the priests tend to show up half sober, mumbling Latin like it's a half-remembered lullaby. But with nobility, everything's heightened. The rope must be new, the blade gleaming, the crowd silent enough to hear a feather drop, or a head. Mainstream historical fact incoming. Executioners were often paid more, sometimes triple, for beheading a noble, not just because of the political stakes, but because it had to look honorable. The blade had to be sharp, the cut clean, no sawing, no slipping. Ideally, one stroke, and the affair was over before the condemned even blinked. You adjust your hood as you arrive, the din already buzzing. People pretend not to look at you, then glance anyway. Someone gasps softly when you pass. A child clutches his mother's skirts like you're the boogeyman come to life. The condemned noble stands tall, trying to radiate dignity. He's draped in thick robes that would make swinging a real pain. You'll have to shift them, carefully, like peeling back the silk off a particularly snobby fruit. His hands are bound, of course, but his nose is still pointed skyward. They never meet your eyes. Here's your quirky tidbit for this round. In some cases, nobles were allowed to choose their executioner. If you had enough clout, you could literally hand-pick the person to send you off. Apparently, dying with a familiar hand on the axe was preferable to risking a clumsy local. Imagine swiping through executioners like it's a grim version of Tinder. No, too nervous, too sweaty. Ooh, this one has good posture.
And no surprise, some of the most famous executioners developed reputations far beyond their towns. They were known for precision, for solemnity, for not cracking jokes during the job, unlike that one guy in Bruges who apparently whistled every time he swung. Historians still argue whether this practice of noble execution preference was widely honored or just a bit of romantic myth. There are records, sure, but nobles were experts at dramatizing their deaths, especially if it made for a better family legacy. Nothing like a teary goodbye and a personal executioner to spice up the ancestral record. You reach for your axe. It's heavy, familiar, and colder than you remember. The blade reflects the gray sky above like a cracked mirror. You test the weight, always do, letting muscle memory take over. The last thing anyone wants is improvisation. That's for court jesters and bad poets, not executioners. The priest begins his chant. The noble mutters a final statement, something lofty and forgettable, designed more for family honor than public interest. You only half listen. You've heard them all. Righteous defiance, whispered regrets, even a few sarcastic parting shots. One man once shouted, "Tell my wife she still owes me 3 chickens," before the drop. You had to bite your lip to keep from laughing mid-swing. Today's speech is short, dignified, designed to be carved into a tombstone, or at least gossiped about over dinner. And then he kneels. You step forward, place a hand on his back. It's a gesture meant to be steadying, even though he jerks slightly at the touch. The crowd leans forward as one, like wheat bending in a breeze. You raise the axe, and with a single, practiced motion, bring it down. Silence, the kind that doesn't echo, just absorbs. You don't need applause, just a clear result. And thankfully, today, the swing is clean, quick, final. The priest crosses himself. The guards lift the body away like a prized roast, and the crowd, already half bored, begins to disperse. You don't linger, you never do, but you do catch one thing on your way out.
You wake up to the sound of something soft and persistent. Rain, or at least what passes for rain in your part of the world. A light mist that feels more like someone whispering on your skin than an actual downpour. It clings to the roof in that whispery way, like nature can't decide whether to cry or sigh. Days like this, the town feels muffled, like someone's thrown a woolen blanket over everything. But you don't get the day off. Executioners don't get rain delays. There are no postponements for damp gallows or slippery steps. If anything, bad weather makes the mood more theatrical. Gloom sells the drama. It's basically medieval lighting design. Today's client is less dramatic. A petty thief, third-time offender, finally caught stealing chickens from the wrong house. That would be the sheriff's chicken coop, which, unfortunately for him, is considered both a crime and a personal insult. You arrive early, more out of habit than necessity. The scaffold's wet, the ropes are slick, and the execution pole has grown a nice slick of green algae, which you'll have to scrub off unless you want someone's final moment to involve an undignified slip and slide. This is where you remember the less glamorous half of your work, not the swing of the blade or the snap of the neck, but the waiting, the prepping, the wet socks and muddy cuffs. No one ever talks about how many hours you spend just standing in the fog, polishing wood and mentally rehearsing timing while trying not to get too lost in your own head. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Executioners weren't just headsmen or hangmen. They often had to handle torture, branding, amputations, and even animal disposal. If something needed to be done and no one wanted to do it, guess who got the nod? That's right, you. One of your regular chores, oddly enough, is dealing with animal carcasses that die in public. Whether it's a plague-ridden pig, a collapsed cart horse, or the occasional goat that faints from stress and drama, it's your job to make it vanish before the locals start interpreting it as a divine omen or forming a religious sect around it. You once dragged a bloated cow out of the square during a festival. It had keeled over near the maypole, and for a brief moment, a group of children thought it was part of the celebration. "Is it asleep?" one asked. You didn't answer. Today, thankfully, no animals are involved. Just the thief, a lanky man who looks like he hasn't had a proper meal in weeks. His bones practically clack together when he walks. He doesn't protest his sentence, but he does keep muttering under his breath, either a prayer or a poorly memorized poem. You don't interrupt. Everyone copes in their own way. He's to be hanged, which is simpler, though not necessarily easier. You check the knot 3 times, pull the trapdoor lever once just to test it. Squeak. Always that little squeak, no matter how much oil you use. The gallows have a personality of their own, and today they feel slightly moody. Now here's your quirky tidbit. Some executioners in the Middle Ages believed in rope karma. The belief was that a rope that had been used successfully, meaning it killed quickly and cleanly, would carry that luck into the next execution. They'd mark good ropes with tiny notches or tie secret knots near the end for identification. Bad ropes, those were either burned or sold to unlucky travelers as snake deterrents. That's right, someone, somewhere, slept in a tent with a noose coiled near their pillow, thinking it keeps snakes away. Historians still argue whether executioners genuinely believed in this superstition or if it was just a way to avoid switching out perfectly good hemp. Records are patchy, and let's face it, not many people wanted to sit down and write a philosophical treatise with their local hangman. Dear sir, tell us more about your opinions on rope charm energy and its effect on vertebrae dislocation. You give the thief a moment to say whatever he needs to say. He looks up, not at you, not at the sky, but at the people watching from beneath their mist-darkened hoods. Then a nod. Subtle, like he's not even sure he means it. The lever pulls, the trap gives, and the body drops. It's quick. He doesn't thrash too long, which is always a small mercy. You wait, long enough to be sure, long enough for someone in the crowd to exhale too loudly. Then you signal the guards, who shuffle forward, already discussing lunch like this was just another chore ticked off before midday stew. You head back through the mist, the gallows already being wiped down by a boy too young for the job and too poor to say no. He glances at you and then quickly away. You wonder if he'll be in your
Your next assignment isn't local. That means you have to travel, which always puts a wrinkle in your routine. You're not exactly the kind of celebrity who gets cheers at the city gate, so you travel light and quiet, hood pulled low, sword stashed discreetly beneath the pack. You've gotten good at packing. 2 shirts, 1 heavy cloak, a pouch of salt, don't ask, and a tiny oilskin case that holds a few choice tools of your profession. Also, bread that might technically qualify as fossilized. This time, the summons takes you to a river town about a day's ride east. You rent a mule, not a horse. You don't have the budget or the thighs for horseback. And you set off along the muddy road while the sun plays peekaboo with the clouds. You pass inns, peasants, an overturned cart with a check-in still sitting inside it like it's the captain of a shipwreck. You nod to no one and keep moving. The job? Executing a local nobleman's illegitimate son. Now that's a spicy one. Not because of the crime, treason, allegedly, but because of the optics. Noble families don't like to wash their dirty linen in public, especially not linen with their own family crest stitched into the collar. But you've dealt with this sort before. They never plead, they never beg. They just posture, glare, and try to stand very straight, as though dying with spine alignment makes them martyrs. You reach the town just before sunset, welcomed by no one. A guard shows you to a shed that smells like wet hay and despair. You sleep lightly, half listening to rats argue in the rafters. In the morning, you meet the condemned. He's young, too young for your liking. 17, maybe 18, barely enough stubble to qualify for shaving. He's seated by a brazier, shackled but relaxed, like he's expecting a last-minute pardon or a magic sword to fall from the sky. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, the age of criminal responsibility could be shockingly low. In many regions, children as young as 7 could be held fully accountable for crimes. By 12, you could be hanged. By 16, you were treated as a full adult regardless of context. Compassion wasn't exactly a feature of the judicial system. You study the boy. He has his mother's eyes, apparently, and his father's jawline, which is unfortunately what got him noticed in the first place. He confessed to sharing private letters from his father's estate with a rival noble house. Letters about troop movements, taxes, possibly something more scandalous. Nobody's saying. You're not here to judge, you're here to perform. You notice a peculiar thing, though, the boy's shoes. They're expensive. Soft leather, brass clasps, custom stitching. Not something you see on your average trader. He's been well treated, even here at the end. You suspect strings were pulled to avoid anything public, which is probably why you're here, someone from out of town. Easier to deny involvement if the man swinging the sword doesn't belong to anyone. Execution style has been specified, sword. Not axe, not hanging, definitely not burning. Too flashy. They want clean and elegant. As elegant as you can make it while separating a head from a neck, anyway. You examine the sword they've provided. It's ceremonial, shiny, curved, and about as useful as a breadstick in a knife fight. You'll use your own. It's duller, but it knows what it's doing. You're led to a small courtyard behind the estate. No crowd, just 3 witnesses, 2 guards, and 1 stone-faced steward who looks like his soul was replaced with sour milk. The boy walks himself to the post. He kneels without prompting, spine straight, jaw clenched. Before you raise the blade, he looks up and says, "My father will regret this." Not a plea, not even fear, just a casual prophecy. You do your work. The head rolls cleanly, though the sword pulls a little left. You make a mental note to sharpen it tonight. The steward nods, and a servant steps forward with a cloth to clean the blade. You wave him off and do it yourself. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some executioners in medieval Europe developed specific posture coaching for their clients, especially nobles. It was believed that if your body twitched too much after death, or if your face ended up contorted, it would reflect poorly on their family. So executioners would quietly advise clients on how to hold their jaw, where to fix their gaze, even how to breathe beforehand. You've done it yourself a few times, always discreetly. Dignity costs nothing. Panic, on the other hand, is noisy and contagious. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread tradition or just an individual choice made by more professional executioners, like you. Some argue it was a form of twisted empathy, others say it was all about optics and fees. You're inclined to believe both. Back in your shed, you wrap your sword in oiled cloth and sit quietly. A servant brings you stew that smells like You trudge through the thickening fog of an early autumn morning, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth as you approach a walled town that feels older than the stones it's built from. The mist clings to the air like a secret, and the smell of wood smoke lingers, mixing with something sour, likely from the market's offal piles. It's a familiar scene, the kind that makes you want to stop and breathe deeply, but also reminds you why you don't. You don't have time for fresh air when you're the guy everyone tries not to look at. The townsfolk eye you with a mix of dread and curiosity as you enter. They know who you are. Your reputation precedes you like a shadow, long and unwelcome. You're the executioner, the necessary evil, the guy whose presence turns a lively market square into a hush. Your next task involves a woman accused of witchcraft. This is where your day takes an unusual turn, and the superstitions you've heard whispered in taverns and dark alleys start to crawl closer to reality. You've executed plenty of criminals, but witches? That's a whole different story. First, the mainstream historical fact.
Accusations of witchcraft spiked during the late Middle Ages, fueled by societal tensions, fear of the unknown, and, of course, the ever-enthusiastic church courts. Women, especially those on the fringes of society, were easy targets. Trials often hinged on dubious evidence, like pricked needles, odd markings, or the all-too-convenient testimony of a fearful neighbor. It was a grim business, and you're caught right in the middle. Now the quirky tidbit. In some regions, executioners were believed to have special powers to see witches. This wasn't just rumor. There was a belief that because you dealt with death and the supernatural realm daily, you were somehow attuned to the occult. Some clients even insisted you carry talismans or wear specific colors to ward off witchcraft. You find this amusing, mostly because you're more interested in keeping your blade sharp than chasing shadows, but it did mean a few extra preparations on days like this. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were widespread or isolated superstitions localized to certain villages. Some say it was a form of social control, keeping executioners in line by instilling fear of witchcraft, while others suggest it was just folklore passed down by anxious peasants. Either way, you're the one who has to perform the final act. The accused is brought forth, a middle-aged woman whose eyes hold a mix of defiance and exhaustion. She doesn't deny the charge. Perhaps she knows resistance is futile. The trial was swift, the sentence inevitable. You watch as they bind her hands and lead her to the stake. The wood smells dry and ancient, a stark contrast to the damp air. The crowd murmurs, some casting furtive glances, others openly whispering prayers or curses. You wonder if anyone will remember her name tomorrow, or if she'll become just another ghost story told to scare children. Before the fire is lit, she turns and catches your eye. For a moment, you sense no hatred, only a quiet acceptance. You nod once, a gesture that feels oddly human in this grim theater. You light the pyre. Flames lick the air, the heat rising quickly. The woman's last cries are swallowed by the crackling wood. It's a brutal, elemental end. Later, as you clean your tools by the river, you notice the water is tinged red, and a single blackbird watches from a nearby branch. You recall the superstition that blackbirds are witches in disguise, or messengers from the other side. You shrug it off. After all, it's just a bird. You know, despite your profession, you're not immune to the eerie feelings that linger after days like this. The line between the living and the dead feels thinner, the air heavier. You're left with the same thought you have after every execution. What happens to the soul? Do they linger in the village, haunted by unfinished business? Or do they finally find peace, leaving behind only whispered rumors and fearful glances? As you mount your horse and ride away, the fog begins to lift, revealing a sky slowly brightening with the promise of a new day. The townsfolk return to their routines, some glancing back at the empty square where death briefly danced. You head toward the next town, another name on your ledger, another story in your weary mind. The road ahead is long, and you know you'll be back here again, walking that fine line between justice and misery, between duty and loneliness.
You find yourself on a narrow, winding road cutting through dense forest. The canopy above filters the sunlight into mottled patches on the dirt path, and the scent of pine mingles with the faint, ever-present undertone of smoke from distant hearths. It's quiet, too quiet if you ask anyone but yourself, and you can't help but feel like the trees are watching you as you trudge along. No one does, of course. It's just the kind of thought that creeps in when you've spent too many nights alone with your own shadow. This time, your destination is a castle perched on a rocky hill, its walls crumbling but still intimidating. The lord of the castle has requested your presence for a delicate matter. A nobleman has been accused of betraying his liege by conspiring with rival factions. The punishment? Beheading, swift and sure.
Let's start with a mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, executioners often worked closely with local lords or city officials, but their appointments could be precarious. Sometimes they were permanent town employees, other times they were summoned only when needed. Their pay was inconsistent, often supplemented by fees or gifts from families of the condemned, payments that were usually hush-hush and, let's face it, a bit extortionate. You arrive at the castle and are shown to the dungeons, a dank, miserable place filled with the echoes of despair. Your prisoner awaits you, a man who, despite his noble blood, looks every bit the worn and weary criminal. His face is pale, his eyes sharp but tired. He asks no questions, offers no pleas. You sense he knows his fate and accepts it with the practiced stoicism that only the powerful can sometimes afford. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some executioners were believed to have secret knowledge of poisons and potions. It was whispered that many could administer a quick, painless death with a special concoction, sparing the condemned a public spectacle. You, however, have never been trusted with such secrets. In fact, you sometimes joke that if you had poison, you'd probably poison yourself first. The idea of a gentle death via poison remains one of the many rumors historians debate to this day. Did such mercy actually exist, or was it just comforting gossip? Your job is straightforward: a clean execution in the castle's courtyard. The nobleman is given the choice to die by sword or axe. Both brutal, but the sword is considered slightly more honorable. He chooses the sword. You prepare your blade, sharp and gleaming, the weight of it familiar in your hands. The nobleman kneels, the cold stone beneath his knees a cruel reminder of finality. As you raise your sword, you notice a subtle tremor, not in his body, but in his eyes, a fleeting glimmer of regret or fear. You push it aside. Emotions are a luxury you can't afford. The stroke is swift, clean, and mercifully quick. The head falls, rolling a short distance on the flagstones before coming to rest near your boot. Afterward, as you clean your sword and sheath it, you overhear the castle's steward whispering about secret messages the nobleman allegedly sent. Historians still argue whether these supposed plots were real acts of treason or the paranoia of desperate rulers clinging to power. You leave the castle behind, the chill of the dungeon fading but not quite leaving your bones. The path before you is long, and the weight of the sword at your side reminds you of the burden you carry. You mount your horse, the clinking of armor and murmurs of the castle fading as you ride away. The forest envelops you again, the trees seeming to sigh with relief at your departure. The life of an executioner is lonely, shadowed by the weight of lives ended and secrets kept. You wonder if anyone truly understands what it means to hold the blade that decides fate, or if you're destined to remain a ghost walking the borders of light and dark. You wake to a chilly morning, the kind that makes your breath hang in the air like ghostly ribbons. The village you're passing through is small, nestled between rolling hills that look like they've been painted with a dull brush. The market square is deserted, save for a few chickens pecking at the dirt, unconcerned with the grim task ahead. You can almost hear the silence, thick, heavy, and expectant. This time, your role is different. You're not just the executioner. You've been asked to oversee a public humiliation before the final act. A man accused of fraud and theft is to be pilloried, exposed to the scorn of his neighbors before meeting his fate. It's an old tradition, one that blends justice with spectacle, and you're right in the middle of it. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Pillories and stocks were common forms of punishment in medieval Europe, meant to shame and physically restrain offenders. They were often placed in the busiest part of town so the whole community could participate in the punishment, sometimes by throwing rotten vegetables or worse. The goal was social control, making an example out of the offender to deter others. Now for the quirky tidbit.
Some executioners were also tasked with collecting shame fees from those punished in pillories, small payments that covered the cost of the equipment and the maintenance of public order. It's an odd combination of roles, but hey, your job has never been simple or clean. Historians still argue whether these public punishments were effective deterrents or just occasions for communal cruelty and entertainment. Some suggest they fostered a kind of dark solidarity among townsfolk, while others believe they only deepened social divisions. You watch as the man is secured in the wooden frame, his head and hands trapped, his face flushed with humiliation. The crowd begins to gather, a mix of curious onlookers and those who clearly wish ill upon him. You stand nearby, sword sheathed, waiting for your moment. The humiliation lasts hours, punctuated by jeers and occasional gifts of mud or eggs. You've seen worse, but you can't help but feel a twinge of pity for the man, even if his crime was real. When the time finally comes, you lead him to the scaffold. His punishment is to be hanged, a swift but final end. You prepare the noose and adjust the trapdoor, your hands steady despite the weight of the moment. As he stands on the platform, the crowd's noise fades into a dull roar in your ears. The man glances at you, a silent plea hidden in his eyes. You nod almost imperceptibly, signaling the start. The trapdoor drops, and the man's body jerks once before hanging still. You count the minutes until you're sure death has come. Afterward, you return to your lodging, weary and contemplative. You think about the layers of justice and punishment, about shame and fear, and how they shape the lives of everyone in this small, quiet town. You wonder if the man's shame lingers longer than his body did, and if the crowd leaves the square feeling any better or just a little emptier. The road calls again, a ribbon of dirt and shadow leading you onward, ever onward. You trudge through muddy streets after a relentless rain, the gray skies pressing down like a weight on your shoulders. The smell of damp straw and smoke from hearth fires blends with something else, fear, lingering thick in the air. You reach the town square where an unusually large crowd has gathered, faces a mix of curiosity and dread. Today isn't just any execution day. It's a festival of justice, a macabre celebration where your role is both dreaded and oddly revered. Mainstream fact time. Public executions in medieval Europe were often held on market days or during festivals to maximize the crowd and reinforce authority. The executioner wasn't just a grim figure, but a part of the community ritual, a necessary actor in a brutal play designed to maintain order. Now the quirky tidbit. Some executioners in parts of France and Germany wore distinctive, colorful costumes, almost theatrical, to make them stand out in the crowd. Think less grim Reaper, more twisted carnival barker. This was partly to separate them from ordinary citizens, but also to create a spectacle. You find it hilarious personally, considering your usual dark and somber attire. But apparently, fashion and fear went hand in hand. Historians still argue whether such theatricality helped uphold justice or merely turned punishment into a grotesque form of entertainment that distracted from real reform. Today's execution involves a thief who's been caught red-handed multiple times. The sentence? Hanging, with the added twist of being displayed in chains afterward as a warning to others. You feel the crowd's restless energy as the condemned man is brought forth, shackled and weary. His eyes dart nervously, and you wonder if he's hoping for a miracle or just dreading the inevitable. You prepare the gallows, the wood slick from the rain, your hands steady despite the chill. The crowd murmurs, a low hum of anticipation, as you place the noose carefully around the man's neck. The trapdoor swings open with a sudden crack, and the man's body jerks before stilling. The crowd gasps, and some cheer. Others turn away, unable to watch. You stand off to the side, shielded from their gaze, thinking about the strange blend of fear and fascination that public executions inspire. As the man hangs, you catch sight of a child near the edge of the crowd, eyes wide with a mixture of horror and curiosity. You remember your own childhood and wonder what stories this child will tell when they grow up. After the body is removed, the chains are placed on a post in the market square, a grim trophy. You pack up your tools as the crowd slowly disperses, leaving behind the heavy silence of finality. You can't help but think about the paradox of your job, hated yet essential, feared yet oddly respected. The executioner's life is a lonely one, walking the tightrope between justice and cruelty, survival and despair. As you mount your horse and ride out of town, the sun begins to peek through the clouds, casting long shadows behind you. You push through the cold morning fog that clings to the cobblestones of a bustling town, slowly waking from its slumber. The faint smell of baking bread mixes with the sharper scent of damp leather and wood smoke. Today's task is unlike the others. You're to oversee the execution of a man accused of heresy, a crime that sets the whole town buzzing with a different kind of tension. It's not just about justice, it's about belief, fear, and control. Let's hit the mainstream fact. During the Middle Ages, heresy was considered a threat not just to the state, but to the very fabric of society. The Church wielded immense power, and those who challenged orthodox beliefs could be branded heretics and punished harshly, often by execution, sometimes by burning at the stake. Now, for something a bit quirky. Executioners involved in heresy trials sometimes had to double as religious enforcers, carrying not only blades but also holy water or crosses to ward off evil. Some townsfolk believed the executioner's role was as much spiritual as physical, a bridge between the divine and the condemned. You, however, think that's a lot of responsibility to shove on someone whose primary skill is chopping heads. Historians still argue whether these harsh punishments truly deterred heresy or only fueled underground dissent and secret gatherings. Did public executions strengthen faith or stir rebellion? The answer remains murky. The condemned man is led out, his clothes simple, his demeanor calm but resolute. His eyes meet yours briefly. There's no fear there, only conviction. You wonder if he believes he's martyr or fool, but you keep your thoughts to yourself. After all, your job is to carry out the law, not judge its wisdom. The execution is set in the town square, a place usually filled with laughter and trade, now heavy with anticipation and the scent of burning wood. The man is tied to a stake, a pile of kindling at his feet. The crowd's murmurs rise to a crescendo as flames are lit. You stand back, the heat warming your face, watching as the fire climbs, consuming the man in a slow, terrible dance. His last words are lost to the crackling blaze, swallowed by smoke that curls into the sky like a dark prayer. Later, as you clean your tools, you reflect on the irony. Your hands, which end lives, are also the ones that must prepare the instruments of death with care and precision. You think about how, in this moment, you're both executioner and witness to faith's fierce grip on the world. You mount your horse and leave the town behind, the smoke fading into the morning light, the echoes of the past lingering in your mind. You walk along a narrow country lane lined with ancient oaks, their gnarled branches scraping the sky like arthritic fingers. The scent of wet earth and fallen leaves fills your nostrils, grounding you as you think about the strange life you lead. Today, you're headed to a small village where an unusual execution awaits, a woman accused of witchcraft. The very word sends a ripple of tension through the air, and you can almost feel the weight of centuries of superstition pressing down. Here's a mainstream fact for you. Witch trials in medieval Europe were grim affairs, often fueled by fear, religious fervor, and social scapegoating. Accusations could arise from petty disputes or unexplained misfortunes. Many accused witches faced brutal interrogations and public executions, commonly by hanging or burning. Now, a quirky twist. Some executioners were rumored to carry secret charms or amulets to protect themselves from the supposed curses of witches. Others were believed to have been witches themselves before taking up the grim profession, a rumor that made their presence even more feared. You scoff at such tales, preferring to trust in steel and duty rather than superstition. Historians still argue how much these trials were driven by genuine belief versus political or economic motivations. Was it truly fear of the supernatural, or convenient means to eliminate troublesome neighbors? You arrive as the village gathers in the square, their faces a mix of anger, curiosity, and fearful anticipation. The accused woman stands quietly, a figure of both defiance and resignation. Her eyes meet yours for a fleeting moment. There's no pleading, only a silent challenge. The method of execution chosen is hanging. The noose is fastened with care. Your hands move automatically, practiced and steady. The crowd watches in grim silence as you signal to the executioner's assistant. The trapdoor falls, and the woman's body jerks once before hanging limp. As the crowd disperses, whispers begin. Some believe she was innocent. Others insist the punishment was justified. You're left alone with your thoughts and the fading echo of the event. The path back is long and quiet, the forest seeming to watch as you make your way home. You wonder how many more stories like this you'll witness, how many lives will pass through your hands before your own fate is decided. The life of an executioner is a lonely road, shadowed by fear and respect, wrapped in mystery and burdened with silence. You arrive at a fortified town where the air is thick with anticipation and a hint of unease. Today's execution is to be a particularly public affair, a nobleman caught committing treason. The stakes are higher than usual, and the atmosphere buzzes with tension beneath the usual morning calm. You can feel the eyes of the powerful watching as you prepare your tools and the scaffold, knowing that this is more than just a routine duty. A mainstream fact: treason was considered the gravest offense in medieval times, punishable not just by death, but by a series of humiliations designed to strip the offender of honor. Beheading was the usual method for nobles, seen as a clean death compared to hanging or burning reserved for commoners. For the quirky bit, some executioners specialized in beheadings for nobility and carried customized swords designed for a single swift strike. Though tales of botched decapitations, while rare, were legendary and deeply feared. There are stories of executioners using enormous axes or swords so heavy they needed 2 hands, turning the moment into a dramatic spectacle. You find that a bit theatrical for your taste, but appreciate the necessity. Historians still argue whether executions of nobles were more about justice or political theater, whether these punishments genuinely deterred dissent or simply reinforced the ruling class's power through spectacle. The nobleman steps onto the scaffold with the dignity expected of his rank, but you can see the tension in his jaw. You prepare the sword, its cold weight in your hand grounding you, as always. The crowd is hushed. Even the birds seem to have paused their singing. With a steady breath, you raise the blade and bring it down in a single, clean motion. The nobleman's head falls, and the crowd exhales collectively. The body is taken away quickly, leaving behind a mix of relief and solemnity. As you pack up your equipment, the weight of your role settles around you. You are the instrument of justice, the final arbiter of fate, yet forever separate from the world you serve. No one thanks you, no one wishes to be your friend. You carry on, moving from town to town, execution to execution. The road stretches before you, endless and lonely, the echo of footsteps and history weaving through the silence. Now, as you finally prepare to rest, you can almost feel the shadow of the past reaching out, reminding you of the price of survival in a world that both fears and needs you. Now, as you finally prepare to rest, you can almost feel the shadow of the past reaching out, reminding you of the price of survival in a world that both fears and needs you. The evening draws close, and with it, the heavy weight of stories past begins to soften, like embers fading in a dying fire. You settle into the quiet, the distant murmur of the world calming like a lullaby just beyond reach. The harsh clang of the executioner's sword and the crowded whispers of judgment dissolve into the gentle hum of the night. It's okay to let go of the shadows now, to breathe softly and feel the comfort of darkness wrapping you like a warm, familiar blanket. All those grim tales, those moments caught between life and death, they belong to another time, another place. Here, now, you can drift, safe and steady, toward the restful silence you deserve. Close your eyes and let the world slip away, carried off by the slow rhythm of your breath. Tomorrow is another day, another story waiting patiently in the wings. Until then, rest easy, knowing you have traveled far and learned much. Sweet dreams are just ahead, waiting quietly in the soft folds of night.